All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Pardip Bolina. I'm the Associate Director here at the Center for Global and Intercultural Study, or CGIS, at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I've been in this position I'm finishing up my 11th year, and I'm joined by Jocelyn. Jocelyn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Kwolek, also with the University of Michigan CGIS office, and I've been with the office for about 14 years.
So to begin, we just have a few housekeeping slides as folks continue to trickle in. Just a friendly reminder, if you could please mute your microphone and just make sure your display name is correct. And then also we have a little bit of a protocol. Hopefully we will not be Zoom bombed, but just in case, we will try to reach out to participants as soon as possible with a new link. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn to go ahead and get us started.
Okay, so I'm going to start by just quickly reviewing what the goals of this session are, which are to define the overall responsibilities of a marketing and communications type of position, to give some tips for making the case for having such a position, to talk about work that can be shared, shifted, or eliminated, and also talking a little bit about priorities for this position. And just a quick note that we're happy to take questions, but please do hold them until the end. So I'm going to start by talking about writing a position description or a posting for a marketing or communications position. So here at U of M, we generally start by defining what key areas of responsibility are for a given position along with the effort associated with it. And by effort, we mean percentage of time. So from our most recent position description, those key areas of responsibility were creating and maintaining the consistency of our communications and all of our materials, maintaining our website and Studio Abroad website content, drafting materials for admitted students and our instructional faculty, developing communications for recruiting U of M students and faculty, and also advertising our various programs and events, establishing and maintaining our social networking sites, and leading the execution of formal events. So those are sort of the basic overarching things that we established this position to do. Certainly beyond that, you can get into the nitty-gritty of what those day-to-day responsibilities look like. We do have that information available on the conference website as a resource. You can view the fully fleshed out position description if you want to see more of a breakdown of what those responsibilities are. Of course, there's also no one-size-fits-all approach for marketing and communications, so each institution can do things in the way that best works for them. So, for example, I know that there are a lot of institutions who also have folks who have sort of a dual or hybrid role, where they're doing traditional study abroad advising as well as communications. So it's really just going to be a matter of fleshing out what the responsibilities need to be for your given situation. So in further developing a position description, you'll want to make sure that you also include a mission statement. You want to make sure that potential applicants are engaged with the mission and nature of your work, as well as a diversity statement and making sure that you're using inclusive language throughout a job description and posting. And you want to make sure that you're casting the widest net possible to get the best possible applicants for this type of position. You'll also look to benchmark the position, so compare it to what comparable positions might look like, both inside your organization and potentially externally. That will help allow you to make sure that the title, qualifications, and salary range that you're proposing for a position is appropriate. You'll more than likely work in consultation with an HR professional to sort those things out. But those are things that you'll all want to have established when you start thinking about a position and posting a position. So I'm also going to talk about making a case for such a position. I think that especially in today's budget climate, most of us have to make a solid argument for why we want to do anything that's going to incur any sort of additional costs. So historically, we've been sort of asked to provide a narrative or justification as to why we need either a new position or to replace an existing position. So I'm just going to go through some of the common questions that we've answered over the years and how we've answered them. So the first question is, why do you need the position and how will it impact your unit's goals and the mission of the college or the larger organization? Kind of an obvious response, but we certainly want to increase the number of students who study abroad that meets both our objectives as well as the objectives of the larger university. Equally as important, we want to make sure that study abroad is seen as something that's accessible to underrepresented students. We want to prepare critical communications for admitted students. So it's not just about student recruitment, it's also making sure that we have clear, accurate communications that go out to students once they've been admitted to a program. And then we're also in the position where every year we're trying to recruit new faculty and new programming. So every year we need to get the word out and sort of deepen the bench of faculty who are willing to teach for us and meet the evolving needs of our students. And then this role can also play a role in fundraising. So working with donors in particular, which can then lead to, having some increased funding for particular programming or some funding for student awards. We're also typically asked, well, what would happen if you didn't have someone to do this work? And really the answer is the opposite of everything we just talked about. All of the good things that we want, we wouldn't necessarily be able to achieve. So it could be decreased enrollment, decreased representation. We could have students becoming less prepared because we're not communicating effectively with them. We could have a shortage of faculty or programs and potentially funding shortfalls if you are relying on relationships with donors. We also tend to think about, are there metrics or just data that will support the request? So one of the things that we've thought about is, can we identify the number of students who go abroad from the University of Michigan, but who don't necessarily go through one of the established study abroad offices? Certainly that number could indicate that there's a certain percentage of our student population that we're not reaching. And we can figure out, through a marketing communications professional, how we can broaden our message, broaden our scope. You can also look at enrollments at peer institutions. Certainly, if enrollments at your institution lag behind others, that could help make the case for why you need a marketing and communications professional. You can also look at some data for what is the percentage of underrepresented students on your study abroad programs. Ideally, at a minimum, that should mirror what the population is of your general campus. If it doesn't, then you may need a more targeted marketing and outreach strategy. Another thing that we have mentioned on quite a few occasions is that we have a number of programs and we need quick, timely, and accurate communication about those programs. There was a time in our past when we worked with another office within the college to update some of our materials. And what both they found and we found was that there was just simply too much for an external unit or external person to keep track of. So it really helped us make the argument that having someone in-house to do the work was really essential. And then also thinking about, well, we need to reach a lot of students in order to reach our enrollment goals. So we all know there's attrition involved with students applying to study abroad programs. So if your goal is to send 1,000 students, you're definitely going to need to talk to much more than 1,000 students in order to yield those sort of results. So I think it's just reminding your audience the scope of what you're working with and the actual impact that you're hoping to have across campus. Then you can also consider, do other internal units have this position or offices at other institutions? You can gather organizational charts and position descriptions from other units on campus, or contact study abroad offices from peer institutions. You just really want to find out, how is this work being done, so that you can speak to those different ways. We also like to try to address proactively, if we can, how it is fiscally responsible or can be fiscally responsible to add a position. And in this case, we've been able to say having a dedicated person in this position allows us to reduce other external costs. So we are not contracting out printing. We're not contracting out graphic design or advertising. We're able to do those things in-house. Also, if your unit is self-funded or able to assess any kind of fees, certainly the more students you have, the more fees you're going to generate for your unit. And then again, back to the fundraising piece, the better your efforts to connect with potential donors, the more funding that you may be able to secure in that way. And then we've also been asked sometimes to say, well, why wouldn't other staffing options work that might be perhaps a little more affordable, like shared staffing or using student employees? So again, we've made the argument that the number and variety of our programs really does require specialized knowledge. and that the amount of work requires a dedicated person, and that having that dedicated person ensures a real consistency in the materials and the branding. And that's been a pretty successful argument for us over the years. So in general, in order to make your case for this position as strong as possible, you'll want to anticipate any concerns with your request and proactively address it. So don't wait for the question to be asked. Try to make the argument ahead of time to show that you've really thought through all the different scenarios and what would be the most effective. You'll want to use data where it's available. Try to avoid making general arguments such as we need this because we're unique. I've talked to a number of folks within our college who has said basically every unit thinks that they're unique. So if that's your main argument, it's probably not going to get you the result that you want. So try to use as much data and factual information as you possibly can. Also attach any supporting documents such as organizational charts, external position descriptions, other postings, anything that you feel really supports your narrative, attach that so that they have all the information in front of them. And then highlight how the position will support larger institutional goals and benefit students. And then finally, project how the position will address future needs. So typically HR and financial folks who are looking over these types of requests want to know not just how this is going to impact you now, but where is it going to take you in the future? What is the true impact of this position? Now I'm going to turn it over to Pardip.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So thank you, Mariette, for asking about the job description. Stephen from our team has kindly posted it in the chat. And for those of you who might not have seen it, a copy is there as well as on the conference website. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Pardip Bolina. I'm the Associate Director here at CGIS. We realized, Jocelyn and I, as we were preparing for this presentation, that much of the information she shared is from when we've posted this position in the past, in the last decade. I think we've been working together, and that if we had to post it tomorrow, which, knock on wood, we will not be posting it tomorrow or anytime soon, we do recognize that it would look a little bit different. And I think the main change we would put in the posting relative to what you've seen in the chat is really adding its own key responsibility in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've tried to include some very concrete examples of some DEI initiatives that have fallen into our communicator's position. And I'm not planning on going through all of them today, but the slide is hyperlinked, so you'll have an opportunity to click on them to learn a little bit more about what that kind of work looks like on a day-to-day basis. And of course, I'm happy to answer questions at the end. But what I sort of wanted to add regarding the specific addition of DEI work is that it's beneficial for obvious reasons. I mean, it's helping our unit with its mission of trying to increase access to study abroad experiences for underrepresented students. But what I was a little bit surprised about, pleasantly, is that over the years, I've gotten the feedback from those in this role that this heavy emphasis on DEI work is actually making the position more fulfilling and rewarding, and makes it different from other marketing positions, you know, in the private sector, for example. So just a side note that it's really a win-win situation. If you do choose to opt to add this, you know, DEI piece into the position, I would really encourage you to be thoughtful and intentional throughout the interview process. So it's not just about posting it on the job description, but it's also making sure you're asking multiple questions in round one of the interview, multiple questions in round two. And in the end, I think it's really worth it because I feel like we have a communicator now that has this kind of expertise along with the marketing skills, and it just raises the bar in terms of what our office can accomplish. Next slide, please. So speaking of the evolution of the position, obviously, I'm sure everybody else is in the same boat. 2020 has really made us question whether we would tweak this position even further. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is a performance planning document that our communicator put together in September of last year. And it was just our attempt to try to get a handle on how things were going to be changing this year, but potentially more permanently going forward. So for those of you who are considering posting in the near future, I would encourage you to go through this document. The full document is on the website to further inform and tweak your key areas of responsibility and skills required for the position. Just to give you a few examples, certainly I think virtual events are here to stay. So Jocelyn and, our former description talked about traditional event planning. That might still be relevant, but probably to a less degree. And I would also want to talk about somebody who's skilled at engaging students in virtual events. Likewise for us, I think our days of printing an 80-page print catalog might actually be over, which is hard for us to say because we feel that this piece has been tremendously successful historically. We have catalog racks all over campus that we're constantly replenishing over the year because students are picking them up to the tune of like 3,000 to 4,000 catalogs go out a year. Right now, for obvious reasons, having a program catalog where you have cancellations very regularly just doesn't make sense. We would never be able to keep it up to date. But in this document, our communicators sort of pointed out, I think students are ready to access information in very different ways. And that along with sort of more of a focus on environmentalism in general, sustainability, this might be the time that we go ahead and make this pivot and leave the print catalogs. And then sort of a final example is, I think after the murder of George Floyd, we've definitely as an office have decided to couple social justice and intercultural work even more intentionally and visibly than we had been doing in the past. So this is in terms of our resources, our website, and so this could also impact our communicator roles position going forward. Next slide, please. So I think also when we were planning this session, we recognized that in this current budget climate, requesting a new position just might not be possible at this time, and that many folks might be struggling to figure out, how do I get this work done? Is there stuff that maybe has lower priority or just lends itself to being shared or shifted? And likewise, are there things that are really important to keep if you have a lean team to dedicate to marketing and communications? So we're going to spend the remainder of our session just touching upon that. I think the first area is original content. So I thought it was interesting in talking to Stephen, our communicator, that he was saying that when he first came to CGIS, he really thought that he would be spending a lot more time putting together, interviewing students and putting together longer pieces, which makes sense in light of our mission, our desire for students of different social identities to see themselves abroad and understand what that kind of experience could be like. But the reality is creating that particular type of original content is very time intensive. And what he has realized over the years is that many of our partners in the field are stepping up. So organizations like Diversity Abroad, IFSA Butler, IES, just to name a few, there are many, many more, are creating great resources and also sharing their student stories. And they're okay with us sharing those stories and resources as well. So he's still trying to get these messages across to our students, but it becomes more about curating this information and finding ways to get it to our students rather than creating it all together. Of course, we still want to have a Michigan feel. And so the question is, well, how do you get that? And we've had a little bit of success in having student workers write pieces. And we've also relied on scholarship and photo contest requirements where students can write maybe a blurb or a photo, a caption for the photo that's a little bit more detailed or thoughtful and makes reference to the experience as a whole. So that's how we're handling that type of original content. For social media, I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on this because I think Stephen's earlier session focused on this very topic. But I think the ultimate conclusion we have come to is that, initially social media is very attractive. It seems like it's a quick and easy way to access a large audience. And what we found in our experience is that it's not actually that easy. It does require quite an investment and planning to really stay on top of multiple constantly changing platforms, to attract followers, to keep them engaged. So this year, we're actually going to experiment with streamlining a bit to just a couple platforms that we're hoping we can focus on and do well. Those are Instagram and YouTube, if anyone is interested. But that we'll spend more of our focus on getting key messages out to other more robust, thriving social networks on campus. So we're very fortunate on campus. There's a ton of listservs and just social networks that are very active. Followers are engaged. And so if we invest our energy in forming great relationships with those units, we have had some success in their letting us plug into their social networks. Also, our coordinator did research this quite a bit this year, and has found that some other study abroad offices have actually achieved some success in having student workers take a more prominent role with social media, which makes complete sense. I mean, I think they know what's in and how to best communicate and connect with their peers. So we would recommend exploring that. We certainly are planning to. For website management, I think thankfully we've now arrived at a time that in most cases, you don't need to know how to code to make website changes. And as a result, we've had several staff members on the team actually come voluntarily and said, can I get trained on the website management system? And that's great professional development for the team. And it also avoids us sort of creating a bottleneck where there's only one single person that can make updates to the website. So this allows our communicator to focus more on design than just the nitty gritty of I need to go onto the website and say this program has been canceled or the dates have changed, things like that. And then lastly, consolidating events. Somewhat similar to social media, we realized that in terms of our unit, in the past, we've offered many small events and throughout the year, and they aren't always well attended. So we're actually thinking to shift towards streamlining into maybe a single major event, perhaps each term. In the past, obviously the fair was one of those events. But also more recently, you'll see a flyer on there for a winter advising virtual event that we just did that we were really pleased with. We didn't even promote it that heavily, but with just the limited promotion, we had a great turnout. But one of the reasons we're doing this, I think, is that it's just easier to coordinate with our partners. What I mentioned before, we have these connections with other departments. We're asking them to promote an event. And there's going to be fatigue if we're sending them something every other week to say, can you send this out? Both from the units and their students. So if we can try to be thoughtful about having two big events, you'll see this winter advising event had 10 sort of events within it. It gives an opportunity for many CGIS students to connect with us, but doesn't result in that same sort of fatigue in terms of marketing to other units or students. I will also say about the winter advising event that it was talking about investment. I mean, it was just amazing not to have to reserve rooms, order food, make sure a faculty member was in town the day that we wanted to do it. I mean, I do think it's a bit of a game changer, and I'm happy to talk more about that if folks would like at the end. So lastly, we wanted to conclude with what to keep, recognizing, again, you probably have to shift certain things off for the time being if you don't have a staff member. So these are the three areas that we would really encourage you to invest in if you can. The first, Jocelyn mentioned, it's prominently in the job description, just the branding and consistency. Somebody who does their work well in terms of graphic design and being thoughtful about communication should be designing the templates for the website, presentations, newsletters. But then our advising team can sort of update or tweak as necessary going forward. To give you an example, at that recent advising event, it was really nice because, our coordinator connected with our health and safety coordinator as well and said, like, how do we want to talk about COVID in all 10 of those different sessions? And he developed a slide, and then that consistency went across all the sessions, which I think took pressure off the advisors on how they were going to talk about it, frame it. And it also meant that we were very confident that no matter which of those mini sessions our students attended, they got the information that they needed. Also ensuring, so I mentioned earlier, we're streamlining our events. We're just probably not going to have many CGIS events, as many as in the past. But that doesn't mean we're not going to be visible on campus. Hopefully it's the opposite. We're just focusing our presence on campus through participation in existing well-attended events. So our coordinator just makes sure that we are part of new student orientation. We are part of all the first week of school events, campus days for prospective students, major minor fairs, transfer orientations. That does not mean he is the person at those events, but he's maintaining the relationship with the units that sort of are the gatekeepers for those experiences, and then sort of reaches out to our advising or peer advising team to make sure, again, we're visible and there on campus with the appropriate person. And then the last piece is just a shift that we've done sort of slowly over the years, but we've really stepped away from general advertising to just say, you should study abroad or find a program that's right for you. We've gotten rid of things like bus signs, diag boards, or if you have a quad, even what we put in the student newspaper. That type of general marketing did take up time and money, frankly. But we didn't get much feedback from students saying that that's how they heard about CGIS or that's what made them walk through our door or connect with us. Instead, we feel like we've been having more success when we focus on connecting certain student populations with programs that might be a good fit for them. So, for example, we have a pretty good relationship with our programs in the environment. And, rather than just sending a generic email to say you should study abroad, we'll work with them to say, like, how about these 5 programs? Do these fulfill requirements? Well, let's create a MailChimp, for example, that just highlights those, so that for a student, it's not overwhelming either to look through all the programs. They can say, oh, my department just sent me these kinds of programs. And we're also doing that for student orgs. If we get invited to meet, they want heritage seeking programs or something like that, we adapt and invest in that type of work.